I'm Claire Navarro, 43 years old, and I've spent 22 years building a career in military intelligence that I was never allowed to talk about at the dinner table. For over a decade, I gave the man my mother married every opportunity to see what I'd built. He introduced me as his stepdaughter, who works a Navy desk job, even after I made Rear Admiral. But then one night at a gala in Washington, a Navy captain grabbed my arm in the lobby in front of both of them, demanding ID, and what happened next changed the way I thought about all of it. Have you ever worked your whole life to build something real, only to have the people closest to you refuse to see it? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to keep building, even when no one around you understood what you were building, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about women who kept going anyway. What happened at that gala, I promise you, you won't see coming. My father used to take me to the docks on Saturday mornings. I was 6 years old and he was 31, a chief petty officer in the United States Navy, a man who moved through the world with a steadiness that I thought was just his personality, and later understood was something he had trained into himself over years. We would walk to the waterfront in Norfolk before the heat came up, and he would show me the ships, the gray hulls, and the high bows, and the long lines of portholes, like rows of closed eyes. And he would explain what each one did in the kind of plain language that makes complicated things feel possible. He crouched to my height once near a destroyer's waterline and told me that everything worth protecting, the sea already knew about. I didn't understand it. I was 6, but I filed it away the way you file things that feel important before you know why they're important. His name was Robert Navarro. He was born in 1960, the son of a Mexican-American family from Corpus Christi, Texas, and he enlisted in the Navy at 18 and spent the first decade of his service going from seaman recruit to chief petty officer through a combination of intelligence and persistence that his commanding officers noted in every fitness report he ever received. He was a compact man, 5'9", economical in his movements, the kind of person who takes up exactly as much space as he needs and no more. But he occupied a room the way some tall men never manage, because he was fully present wherever he happened to be. And that quality is rarer than people realize. He was not someone who needed recognition or applause. He got up early, did the work, and came home. He taught me to make coffee before I was tall enough to reach the pot. He made pancakes with strawberries on Sunday mornings when the week had gone well, which was most weeks. He read at the kitchen table in the evenings with the focused quiet of a person who treats time as something not to be wasted. He told me once when I was 7 and asking him why he liked the Navy when it made him go away so much, that the military teaches you what you're made of, and that whatever that turned out to be, it was yours, and no one could take the knowing of it away from you. I didn't fully understand it then. I thought it was the kind of thing adults said to fill the space between harder things. But I think about it on the days when I am deep in a classified briefing or reviewing operational analysis at midnight. When the work is hard, and the hours are long, and the results are things that will never be attributed to me in public, and I think, yes, that is exactly right. He knew before I did. We lived in Norfolk, on a street with large maples that turned yellow in October, in a house with green shutters and a front yard my father mowed every other Saturday when he was home, which was not always. My mother Linda worked at the school district administration office and made things work on the kind of single income that requires careful attention to monthly totals and very little room for error. She was competent and organized and quietly worried about almost everything, about the bills, about the car, about whether she was raising me correctly, about the phone when my father was on deployment. She married him when she was 24 and he was 25. And by the time I was born, she had already spent 3 years learning what it meant to be a Navy family. Which is to say, she had learned how to sleep in a house without him in it, and how to carry the fear of something happening to him without letting it show on her face when she was talking to me, and how to fill in the space that a long deployment leaves behind with enough routine and normalcy that a child doesn't feel the absence as a wound. She was very good at all of it. She did not complain. But I saw the worry in her even then, as young as I was. I saw how carefully she tracked the phone and how her face changed when it rang. My father died in 1991. I was 8 years old. A training exercise aboard the USS Saratoga, a cable failure during deck operations, a man overboard who could not be recovered in the dark water in time. The Navy sent a casualty assistance officer to our house at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning. He was young and very formal and stood in our doorway, holding his cover in both hands. My mother sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the surface, the way you put your hands on something solid when you need the ground to stay where it is, and she told me in words that were very simple and very careful that my father was gone. She said, "We lost him," which made me think at first of something mislaid rather than something gone forever, the way you lose your keys or a library book. I didn't understand the permanence of it for a week or more, not until the funeral came and went and the folded flag was in our house, in a triangular case on the mantelpiece, and he still was not back. And I understood finally that lost was just the version of gone that left enough room to breathe. The years right after that were the years I do not talk about much, because the things that happened in them were ordinary. In the way that grief makes things ordinary. School continued, meals happened, Linda kept working, I kept going to school, the maples kept turning yellow in October. But the Navy that had taken my father was also, after that, the only thing that still felt like him. The ships, the uniforms, the early mornings, the specific vocabulary of it, the structure and the discipline, and the way a naval installation smells when you go through the gate with someone who belongs there. All of it still carried something of who he was. I know that is a complicated relationship to form with an institution that cost you your father. But I was 8 years old and I did not have the vocabulary yet for complicated. I only knew that when I was near things that reminded me of him, I felt less alone. So I was near those things as much as I could be. I joined NJROTC at 15. I was one of 3 girls in a unit of 22, and I treated the program with a seriousness that some of my classmates found baffling. My ROTC instructor was a retired Navy chief named Petty Officer Morrison, who had served 22 years across 3 home ports and who had the quiet authority of someone who has seen everything worth seeing and is now choosing what to transmit. He wrote in my first semester evaluation that I had the instincts of an officer, and that I would be difficult to ignore. I kept that paper. I still have it somewhere in a box. He meant it as a straightforward performance observation. I understood it as a promise I was making to myself. My mother came to the spring ceremony from the back row, tired in the way that single mothers in their late 30s get tired after years of making everything work on one income, and genuinely proud in the layered way that sometimes emerges from the tired if you have been doing the work long enough. She didn't say much on the way home. She bought me a burger at a diner near the base and told me I had done well. It was enough. I enrolled at Virginia Tech in the fall of 2001 on a Naval ROTC scholarship. It was the fall semester that followed September 11th, which meant that every young person in uniform on that campus understood, in a way that earlier generations might not have, that the choice they were making had weight. My mother drove me to campus on a Sunday in August and helped carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs to my dormitory room. And we stood at the curb with the car still running, and she took both my hands in hers and looked at me for a moment. She didn't say what she was looking for. She said, "Be careful." Not, "I am so proud of you." Not, "Your father would have been here if he could." Just, "Be careful," as if careful were the most important instruction available, the one that covered everything else. I told her I would. I kissed her on the cheek and she got in the car and drove away, and I stood on the sidewalk with everything I owned around me in boxes. And the morning felt enormous, and mine, and more frightening than I had expected it to feel. I was commissioned as an ensign in May of 2004. The ceremony was small, 12 graduates, a modest auditorium, family members in folding chairs on a linoleum floor, a chaplain's benediction that was brief and sincere. My mother was in the 3rd row in a blue dress she had bought for the occasion, and she clapped when they called my name. Not the polite kind of clapping, the kind that means something, the kind that comes from a person who has been paying attention for a long time and is watching something arrive that they have been waiting to see. There was no one else there for me. No father with a camera, no extended family who had made the drive. Just Linda, clapping. In my jacket pocket I had my father's old Chief Petty Officer insignia, the eagle and the chevrons, slightly tarnished, which I had found in a shoebox in the attic 2 weeks before while looking for an old transcript. I had not planned to bring it. But the morning of the ceremony, I put it in my pocket because it seemed like the right thing to have near me, and I rubbed it like a coin the whole drive to the auditorium. When they called my name and I raised my right hand and said the oath, I thought of him crouching at a waterfront in Norfolk, telling me the sea knew everything worth protecting. I thought, I am going to spend 20 years finding out if that is true. There was a particular afternoon I remember from the summer I was 9, the first summer after he died. My mother was at work and I was alone in the house, for the first time in the way children sometimes are when they are finally deemed old enough and too old to need watching. I found his service record in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the study, in a manila folder with his name in his own handwriting on the tab. I sat on the floor and read through the whole thing, the evaluations, the commendations, the duty station records, the promotion notices, His commanding officers used words like exceptionally capable and technically proficient and leads by example. One fitness report said he was the kind of chief petty officer that a ship cannot function without. I folded that page and put it in my pocket. I put the folder back exactly as I had found it and went and made a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table where he used to read in the evenings. Something settled in me that afternoon. Not a decision exactly, more like a direction, a sense of which way I was going even though I could not yet have named a destination. My mother and I did not talk about my father as much as I wanted in those years. She was managing too many things at once to have much space for grief as a sustained topic. When I asked about him, she answered briefly and moved on. But on the best evenings, when the kitchen was quiet and the dishes were done, she would sit at the table and tell me something small and true. How he laughed at his own jokes before the punchline. How he kept a running list of things he wanted to do when he was home that he never quite got through. How the first time she saw him in uniform, she thought he was the most serious-looking person she had ever encountered, and then he immediately spilled his coffee and laughed at himself about it. I kept those stories the way I kept the service record. They were the private man inside the professional one. The father I was still learning. The years after my commissioning were years of quiet, deliberate accumulation. That is the only way I know to honestly describe intelligence work at the junior and mid-grade levels. It accumulates. You learn one thing, and it opens a door to another thing, and you follow the door, and you get better at the following, and eventually you find yourself following threads that other people in the room cannot follow as quickly or as cleanly as you can. I moved through my first assignments at a pace that my supervisors noted, and that I treated as information rather than accomplishment. I am not someone who has ever been primarily motivated by recognition. The thing that motivates me is the work, the specific and repeatable satisfaction of having a clear picture of something that was previously unclear, and knowing that the clarity matters, that real outcomes hinge on whether the analysis is correct. My first duty station was the Naval Intelligence Training Command at Dam Neck, Virginia. I spent 2 years there and learned the foundational structure of all-source analytical work, with a thoroughness that I have been grateful for ever since. I was promoted to lieutenant junior grade in 2006 and assigned to a Defense Intelligence Agency liaison cell at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling in Washington. That assignment changed the way I understood the work. The DIA cell pulled from Army and Navy and Air Force and CIA and NSA simultaneously. And what it required of you was the ability to hold many different streams of incoming data at once and find the coherent picture inside all of them, to see where they agreed, where they conflicted, what the gaps were, and what the gaps might mean. I was good at that. I had always been good at that kind of integration, at standing inside a complicated signal environment and not losing the thread. My supervisors at the liaison cell put me in for the advanced analyst program 2 years ahead of the usual schedule, and I was selected. I was promoted to lieutenant in 2009 and assigned to the Naval Intelligence Coordination Group as a junior analyst. The NICG had been stood up in the post-2003 intelligence reorganization with a mandate to improve joint intelligence integration across the services, to close the gaps between what each branch knew separately and ensure that the commanders who needed the combined picture had it in time to act on it. The organization was small and serious, and staffed by people who had no interest in being in the foreground. I arrived on the first Monday of September 2009 and understood within 2 days that this was where I was supposed to be. In my first week, I met Commander Rosa Delgado, who ran the collection analysis cell and who was, at 34, the most precise officer I had encountered in 5 years of service. She was precise in the way that people become precise when they have been wrong in the past and have decided it is not going to happen again. Careful with language, careful with claims, unwilling to say a thing she could not substantiate. She looked at my incoming evaluation scores on a Tuesday afternoon and told me, without preamble, that I was underplaced and that she intended to find me harder problems. She did. The trajectory of my career runs through that sentence. I have tried, in every supervisory relationship I have had since, to say the equivalent thing when I see it, to tell people clearly what they are capable of, rather than letting them find their way to it by accident. The DIA liaison work was the first assignment where I began to understand what I was actually good at. Not merely competent, but distinctively capable in a specific way. There is a kind of analytical work that requires holding contradiction, two sources saying different things about the same event, and the task is not determining which is right, but understanding what the difference itself tells you, what the gap is evidence of. I was good at that. I could sit with ambiguity longer than most people in the room and keep working rather than resolving toward the nearest comfortable answer. My supervisor there, a Marine colonel named Martinez, who had spent 3 tours in the field before intelligence work, told me once that I was one of the few analysts he had encountered who seemed to get more certain as the situation became more complicated. I wrote that down. By the time I arrived at NICG in 29, I had a clear sense of what I was building. Not a career in the conventional checklist sense, more like a body of work, a cumulative contribution to a specific and important problem. Every program I entered, every classified rotation I completed, added to a picture of something real. The work mattered concretely in ways I could see in the operational record, even when I could not discuss them at a holiday dinner or a Veterans Club event. I had learned by my early 30s to stop needing those two worlds to intersect. The work was enough, or I thought it was. And then Frank would introduce me at a gathering, and I would drive home and sit in a parking garage and realize it was not quite as enough as I had told myself. My mother remarried in June of 2010. I was 27. I wore a dress to the wedding and sat at a table with people I did not know and watched Linda exchange vows with a man named Frank Weston, who was 56 years old and a retired Army colonel with 30 years of infantry service and a chest full of decorations, and the bearing of a man who has spent a long career being the most authoritative person in most rooms he enters. He was not unkind. He was cordial to my mother, attentive in the ways that matter, and generous with compliments in the way that people who have learned to manage rooms tend to be generous. He shook my hand at the reception and asked about my work with the comfortable interest of someone who already knows the answer will be less impressive than whatever he is about to say next. "Linda tells me you do Navy intelligence," he said. "Analysis?" I said something like that. "Support work," he said, nodding slowly. "That's valuable. Army couldn't function without good support. Whole different world from the field, of course." He said support work, the way you might say administrative assistant to someone who runs the company, not cruelty, just a genuine inability to imagine a different category. I noted it and filed it. He didn't know what I did. That was fine. This was a wedding reception, and he was my mother's new husband, and the conversation was going to end in 2 minutes, and I was going to eat the chicken and go home. What I didn't know then was that this would be the first of hundreds of similar conversations spread across 12 years and a dozen family gatherings, in which Frank Weston explained to whoever was in the room that the Navy ran the numbers while the Army ran the field, and that I, as a Navy desk person in a support capacity, was doing good and useful secondary work. He was never malicious about it. He was genuinely, completely convinced, and his conviction was the kind that 30 years of being the most credentialed person in the room can produce. The kind that doesn't update easily because it has never needed to update. I was promoted to lieutenant commander in 2013. By then I had completed 2 classified program rotations and contributed analytical work that had directly shaped joint operational decisions in 2 active theaters. I had received in the classified record that no civilian would ever see 2 letters of commendation from joint commanders that described my work in language I am not at liberty to repeat. At Thanksgiving that year, Frank held court at the dinner table for 20 minutes, explaining the distinction between tactical and strategic intelligence to 2 of his Army veteran friends, and the ways in which Navy intelligence is more removed from the sharp end of things. I ate my sweet potatoes. My mother found me in the kitchen afterward. "He doesn't mean anything by it," she said. "He just doesn't understand what you do." "He doesn't want to understand," I told her. "That's different from not knowing." "Don't make this a thing, Claire." I didn't make it a thing. I drove home Sunday morning, sat with it for a while, put it away, and went back to work. That is what you do. You put it away, and the work continues, and the work is real, and it matters, and it is worth the work, regardless of what anyone outside the building thinks it is. I was promoted to commander in 2016 and appointed deputy director of a classified NICG program that I am still not at liberty to name. I was promoted to captain in 2019 and named deputy director of the full NICG under a rear admiral who retired 2 years later and whose shoes I then filled. I managed operations and built teams and mentored junior officers who were, as I had been, better than they yet understood themselves to be. I lived in an apartment in Arlington and had a full life, good work, real friendships, evenings that belonged to me. I was not unhappy. I was not lonely. I was, I think, still waiting for something I told myself several times over the years I had stopped waiting for. At Frank's American Legion Club in December of 2016, he gave a holiday speech about family and service. He mentioned a nephew by marriage who was an Army Ranger. He mentioned a cousin who had served in Vietnam. He mentioned me last, near the end, almost as an aside. My stepdaughter also serves, he said, in a Navy support capacity. Polite applause. I was in the back row in civilian clothes, 33 years old, a commander who had contributed to operations the men in that room would never be cleared to know about. I drove home and sat in a parking garage for 15 minutes before I could make myself get out. Not because I was devastated, I had passed that stage. Just because I was trying to calculate, one more time, whether it was worth being bothered by. I decided it wasn't. Ceilings don't move because you need them to. I told myself I was done waiting for him to see it. I think I almost believed it. I was selected for Rear Admiral in the spring of 2023. 40 years old, the youngest woman to be named director of the NICG. My detailer called on a Thursday afternoon, and I sat in my office with the door closed and looked at the wall for a moment and said, "Thank you," and hung up and went back to the briefing I had been reviewing before the call came. I called my mother that evening. She was genuinely pleased. I could hear it clearly and without condition. She asked if there would be a ceremony. I told her yes, in a few months, and that I'd like her to come. She said she would. I called Frank. He congratulated me, said it was well-deserved, asked if I was still at the Pentagon. I said yes. He said good, and put Linda back on. That was the full conversation. The Naval Foundation Gala was scheduled for January 23rd of 2026. The Foundation had selected the Naval Intelligence Coordination Group to receive the Distinguished Service Award for its contributions to a classified joint operation the prior year. The kind of operation that exists in the classified record with precision and detail, and in the public record not at all. The Foundation director called me in November to tell me, and I accepted on behalf of my directorate with a quiet pride that I kept off my face until I had hung up the phone. I arranged 2 complimentary tickets for my mother and Frank. I told myself it was a peace offering, a way of saying, without saying it, that the door was still open and always had been. But I knew in the part of me that has learned over 43 years to be honest about my own motivations, that it was also an argument. A final brief. I wanted him in that room. I wanted him to see what I had built with his own eyes, in a setting that had been built around it, where it could not be minimized or redirected. Frank told Linda he wasn't sure what they were going to do there. He said they wouldn't know anyone. Linda relayed this to me. I sent the tickets anyway, with the program. The night of January 23rd, 2026. 18:30 hours. The Mandarin Oriental Hotel, Washington, D.C. I dressed in my service dress blue in the Arlington apartment, the midnight blue jacket, white trousers, gold buttons, and stood in front of the mirror and put on the 1-star shoulder boards. My award ribbons above the left breast pocket, precisely aligned. The gold warfare qualification pin at the collar. I had attended events like this one for a decade. I knew nearly everyone who would be in that ballroom. But that night felt different. My mother and stepfather were going to be in that room, and I wanted just once to be in the same space as Frank Weston and have him see what the Navy had produced. My driver dropped me at the side entrance through a routing error, and I came in through the secondary corridor toward the lobby rather than the VIP entrance. The lobby was marble and gold, warm with chandelier light, full of admirals and generals and defense officials and foundation donors and their families. I came through the corridor and turned toward the main ballroom doors and had walked about 20 feet when the man stepped in front of me. His name was Captain Marcus Webb. 46 years old, a surface warfare officer, 15 years running protocol for naval events. Thorough, reliable, precise in the way that good event coordinators are precise. He did not know me. The NICG is classified enough that its director does not appear in any public-facing Navy personnel directory. What he saw was a woman in uniform with a single silver star on each shoulder board, who had come through the secondary entrance rather than the VIP door, and who looked younger than any rear admiral he had previously encountered. "Ma'am, I need to verify your credentials." I said, of course. I began to reach for my identification. "ID," he said. "Now." And he grabbed my wrist. It was not a light touch. It was 2 fingers and a thumb around my wrist, the grip of a man who has decided he is in charge of this corridor and that the uniform in front of him requires verification before it proceeds. I could feel my pulse under his fingers. I did not pull away. I did not raise my voice. I looked at him. There were perhaps 30 people in the lobby at that moment. Officers, spouses, foundation staff, guests near the bar. I was aware of all of them with the peripheral awareness that 20 years of operating in high-stakes rooms gives you. I was aware, specifically, of my mother and Frank, who were standing near the bar approximately 20 feet to my left, champagne glasses in hand. I had seen them the moment I came through the corridor, and I had registered Frank's expression in the fraction of a second before he registered mine. He leaned into my mother's ear. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man watching confirmation arrive. At last, here was his daughter, in her Navy uniform, being stopped at the entrance to a room by a captain who clearly outranked her in the room's assessment. Here was the universe, providing the conclusion he had been carrying for 12 years. He lifted his glass. "You do not walk into this event without verifying," Webb said. "Flag officer insignia does not grant automatic access, ma'am. I need your CAC card now." I looked at him. "You're going to want to let go of my arm," I said. My voice was level. He opened his mouth. His radio crackled. The frequency was set to project through a small speaker at his belt, a coordination function, standard for event security, designed so that his security team could hear cross-communications in a busy environment. In the marble quiet of the lobby, it carried farther than he likely intended. The nearest cluster of officers, 2 rear admirals and a vice admiral who had been standing in conversation near the corridor entrance, turned their heads toward the sound. The voice was Admiral James Merritt, Chief of Naval Operations. He had been in the command post on the hotel's second floor, monitoring the lobby feeds on the event security screens. His aide had flagged the situation 70 seconds earlier. Merritt had not sent an aide. He had come to the radio himself. "Captain Webb." His voice was unhurried. The voice of someone who does not need to add force to an order because the authority behind the order is absolute. "This is Admiral Merritt. Release Rear Admiral Navarro. That is a direct order." The lobby went completely still. Webb let go of my wrist. He took 2 steps back. He snapped to attention. The color drained from his face the way color drains from a room when a circuit breaker trips, not gradually but all at once, with totality. Beside him, a junior lieutenant on his security team found a spot on the floor to examine. The vice admiral extended his hand. "Claire," he said, in the voice of someone completing something that was always going to be completed. I shook it. One of the rear admirals nodded. The other said quietly, "Good evening, Admiral Navarro." 2 more officers drifted over from the wall near the corridor. I did not look at Frank immediately. I kept my eyes where they needed to be, on the vice admiral's face, on the next handshake, on the work of the next correct thing to say. But in my peripheral vision, I saw his champagne glass tilt. The stem caught at his fingers, and the glass tipped sideways and hit the edge of the marble bar and landed on the floor. It did not shatter, but it landed with a sound, a clear, clean impact on marble that was audible in the silence that Merritt's voice had made. The guests standing nearest Frank turned to look at the glass on the floor and then at him. I kept my eyes forward. The thing about those 45 seconds that I have thought about many times since is not what Webb did. That was explicable, if inexcusable. He made an assessment based on incomplete information and acted on it too quickly and too forcefully. That happens in high-pressure environments. What I think about more is what those 45 seconds looked like to my mother and stepfather, to Frank lifting his glass across the lobby, his expression already settled into satisfaction, already telling itself the story it had been waiting to tell. I think about the certainty he felt in that moment, the completeness of it. And I think about what it takes for certainty like that to reverse in less time than it takes to finish a sentence. Admiral Merritt told me afterward, when we spoke privately after the ceremony, that he had watched the lobby feed for a full minute before coming to the radio himself rather than sending an aide. He said he wanted Webb to hear the order in his own ear, from the CNO directly, and to understand in that moment exactly what it meant for the rest of his career. He said it with the calm specificity of someone who has made many corrections over many years and knows that the manner of a correction matters as much as the correction itself. I thanked him. I meant it. Admiral Merritt came down from the command post 5 minutes later. He found me near the ballroom entrance and apologized personally. I told him no apology was necessary. He said Webb would go through a formal review and that what had happened was unacceptable at any rank. I thanked him and we moved on because there was an award to accept and 300 people waiting in an evening that was not about any of this. The ceremony was at 9:15. A vice admiral read the citation. The room stood. I gave a 3-minute speech that said everything necessary without crossing any line that matters. I looked out at the audience and found my mother in the 4th row. Her expression had changed from the one I had seen in the lobby. She was watching with the careful look of someone who is in the middle of revising something. Some interior picture they have held for a long time that has just revealed itself to be the wrong shape. Frank was beside her, straight-backed, looking at his event program. After the ceremony, at the reception, Linda found me at the refreshment table. She had come without Frank. She was holding a glass of water in both hands. I didn't know it was that kind of event. I sent you the program, Mom. I know, I just didn't understand what kind of program they meant. Frank appeared a moment later. He extended his hand. Congratulations, he said. 2 words. No acknowledgement of the lobby, no acknowledgement of 12 years. A handshake and a 2-word response. The kind of response a man gives when he has been informed he underestimated someone and needs to complete the minimum required acknowledgement. Not warm, not cold. Correct in the way that completing a required form is correct. I drove home at midnight through the city. The Lincoln Memorial was lit against the January sky. The event badge sat in my lap. I had waited for a night like this one. I had thought it would feel like an arrival. What I felt instead was tired in the particular way you feel when you have been carrying something for a long time, and you set it down and realize that the carrying was not the problem. The choosing to keep carrying was the problem, and you've been the one choosing. I drove home and did not feel victorious. I felt like someone who had finally stopped arguing a case with a judge who had already left the room. What the gala clarified, more than anything else, was something I had been circling for years, without quite reaching. I had told myself for a long time that I no longer needed Frank's approval, and that was technically true. I did not need it. I functioned without it. But I had confused not needing with not wanting, and those are different things, and the wanting had been doing quiet work in the background, long after I thought I had stopped feeling it. The night at the Mandarin Oriental was the night I put it down. Not because the radio crackled, though that helped. Because I stood in that lobby and watched Frank's face and saw clearly that he was satisfied, that he wanted me to be stopped, that some part of him had been hoping for it. And I realized I had spent 12 years arguing with a feeling, not a fact. The feeling was never going to change based on my evidence. It was too settled. The only thing I could change was whether I kept showing up to the argument. In the 10 days that followed, I made 3 decisions, quietly and in sequence. First, I did not involve myself in Webb's formal review. He had done something wrong, the process had been initiated. My job was not to make his career my project. Second, I stopped waiting for Frank to reach out. Third, when he did, I received it for what it was. He called on a Sunday morning, 8 days after the gala. He said the event was impressive. He said the award was well-deserved. He said he had no idea the NICG was held in that kind of regard. He spoke for 3 minutes in the careful, measured voice of someone offering professional acknowledgement to a subordinate who has overperformed. He did not say sorry. He did not mention the lobby or the glass or the 12 years. When he said, "Anyway, good, Claire, really, I recognized the ceiling I had been competing with." It had not moved. It could not move. It was the ceiling he had built over the course of 30 years, and it was not going to change because a radio crackled in a hotel lobby. "Thank you, Frank," I said. "Take care." I called my mother the following day. I told her clearly and without cruelty that I was not going to arrange access to my professional world going forward, not to punish anyone, but because it had never helped either of us. She said he had been proud in his way. I said I knew what his way looked like and I didn't need it anymore. A long pause. "That's fair," she said quietly. It was the most honest exchange we had shared in years. I hung up and stood at my kitchen window for a few minutes, watching the traffic below. I felt the way you feel when something overdue has finally been said. Not relief exactly, but something quieter and more sustainable. Like a door that had been ajar for years closing gently at last. In the weeks that followed, the gala incident moved through Navy circles the way things do. A captain grabbing a rear admiral in a marble hotel lobby while the CNO watched on CCTV is not the kind of event that disappears quietly. Webb's formal review concluded in late February. A reprimand and a fitness report notation that would redirect his next assignment. I received a memo confirming the outcome and filed it. Captain Diane Reeves, one of my closest colleagues at NICG, called to tell me she'd heard from a contact in the JAG office. "You handled that so well," she said. "Most people would have." "Diane," I said. "He grabbed my arm in a lobby. I wasn't going to make a production of it." "I know. I'm just saying most people would have." In Maryland, something else was unfolding in the quiet way that humbling things often unfold. A retired Navy captain named Bill Gerhardt, who had attended the gala and knew Frank through a mutual contact, mentioned the incident at Frank's Veterans Association meeting in early February, meant it as a compliment, described watching a rear admiral get detained at the entrance by an overeager protocol captain, and the CNO himself calling on the radio. "Turned out to be Frank's stepdaughter," he said. He meant it to land as impressive. In some corners of the room it did. At the bar afterward, 2 Army veterans found Frank. "You never mentioned she was that far up," one said. "I know what she does," Frank said. He didn't know what she did. He had never asked. I want to say something about Frank that I think is important now that enough time has passed that I can say it without the distortion that resentment adds. He was not a bad man. He was a good soldier, by all accounts, 30 years of service, decorated multiple times, genuinely committed to the mission and to the people under his command. He loved my mother in his way, which was a stable and attentive way, and she was happier in his house than she had been in the years before it. He was not cruel to me. He was not indifferent. He was limited, in the specific way that people who have been the most credentialed person in every room they have entered for 30 years become limited. His map of what service looked like was very detailed and very accurate and very specific to his branch and his era and his experience. It just did not have room in it for what I did. He could not see me because the seeing would have required him to acknowledge a territory he had decided did not exist. That is a human limitation. I have stopped calling it a choice. I think it was more like a habit he never examined. Those are different things. In late February, Frank sat at his computer and searched for the Naval Intelligence Coordination Group. He found almost nothing. A line in a government accountability report from 2023. Director, NICG, Rear Admiral C. Navarro. He stared at the line, then he closed the browser. Linda told me about this weeks later. He didn't say much after, she said. He just got very quiet. I have learned, over many years in many rooms, that some people go quiet when they understand how wrong they have been. That quiet was the closest Frank Weston was ever going to come to an admission out loud. I had waited 12 years for something different. By March, I had stopped. In early March, Linda began calling on Sunday mornings. Not about the taxes, or a neighbor's garden, or anyone's health. Just to call. The first Sunday, 4 minutes, the second, 40. By the third Sunday, I had started keeping my coffee warm and putting away what I'd been reading before she called. She told me she had looked up the Naval Foundation website. She had read the section about the NICG. She said the site described operations in 4 theaters simultaneously. "Why did you never tell us?" she asked. "You never asked," I said. I let that sit. "I know," she said. "I know." The second Sunday, she asked me to explain the shape of my work, not the classified details, just what it meant at a human level. I described the coordination function, pulling intelligence from multiple sources across branches and allied agencies, integrating it for field commanders, making sure the right people had the right picture in time to act on it accurately. "So lives depend on your analysis?" she said. "Yes, Mom," I told her. "They do." A long silence followed, and then, "Your father would have understood that completely." She hadn't said his name like that in years, as a bridge between us rather than a wound. I didn't know what to do with it for a long moment. I just sat with it. The third Sunday, she talked about him more directly than she had in perhaps a decade. She said she had worried for years that I had become obsessed with the Navy as a way of staying close to a ghost, that she had pulled away from understanding my career because looking at it too clearly forced her to feel how much she missed him. "I couldn't stand watching you love something that had taken him from me," she said. "I thought if I kept it small, I could keep the missing small too." I told her I knew. She said she had apologized for me to Frank because it was easier than explaining why she couldn't stand next to all of it without breaking a little. She wasn't excusing what she had done. She was explaining where it had come from. That is a harder thing to offer and a more useful thing to receive. I told her I understood. I meant it. On a Thursday evening in late March, she called outside of Sunday morning and asked me to dinner, just the two of us. "I don't want Frank to come," she said, which was the first time in 16 years Linda Weston had said those 6 words to me. I said yes before I had fully processed the question. A small Italian place in Bethesda she had chosen herself from a list I had sent her 2 years ago that she had apparently kept. She was already there when I arrived, seated in the corner booth with a glass of water and a menu she hadn't opened. She looked smaller than I expected, and more careful with her hands. I sat down and tried to remember the last time we had been alone together in a restaurant, without a reason, without a birthday or a task or a difficult thing to discuss that required a neutral location. I couldn't clearly remember it. That felt significant. We ordered and talked about small things first. Then she put down her bread and looked at the tablecloth. "I owe you something," she said. I waited. "I kept telling him you'd come around, that eventually you'd do something he could put on a shelf and recognize. I kept apologizing for you, to him, to his friends, to people I barely knew at church, for years, and I didn't fully understand I was doing it until recently." "How long did you know?" I asked. "I think I knew for a long time. I chose the easier direction." A pause. He made things feel stable. And you made things feel like your father, wonderful and terrifying at the same time. I didn't know how to hold both of those feelings at once for a very long time. I know, Mom. I reached across the table. I wasn't ready to say all was forgiven. 12 years doesn't compress without losing something real, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But I was ready to eat dinner with her and mean it. I was ready to be in the same room without performing anything for her or asking her to perform anything for me. Walking out, the street cold and clear in the way late March can be, she took my arm at the curb, and we stood for a moment in the dark before the cars. I heard they reassigned that captain, she said. From the gala. Webb, I said. Yes. Good. Flat and certain, and then, your father would have been furious. I almost smiled. I didn't, quite. The moment wasn't quite right for it, but I wanted to. We stood at the corner for another moment before separating to our cars. She didn't offer a formal apology with words that matched the size of what had been done. She had said what she said at the table and meant it, and she was standing here in the cold, not leaving, her arm in mine, until it was actually time to go. That was what she had to offer. It was the harder and more lasting thing. I held her arm another moment. Then we separated. I did not tell my mother that night about the promotion notification I had received the week before. I was being considered for selection to Rear Admiral Upper Half, 08, a second star. Nothing was confirmed yet. But the notification had come, which meant the selection board was considering it. Which meant that the career I had built had produced something I had not allowed myself to anticipate too clearly. I sat across from my mother in that restaurant in Bethesda and said nothing about any of it. I ate my pasta and listened to her and let the evening be what it needed to be, which was not about rank or titles or anything that could be put on a shelf. There would be time later for the rest of it. For now, there was the bread and the lowlight and my mother's careful hands and the first meal we had shared in years, where neither of us was managing something. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting the engine. The street was quiet. Linda's taillights were 3 spaces ahead. I watched them come on in the dark. I didn't know what the relationship was going to become, or whether Frank was going to change in any way that reached me, or whether the Sunday calls would settle into something regular and reliable, or whether they were only a season. I didn't know. But the question felt mine to answer, for the first time in a long time. I started the car and followed her out. The promotion came through in writing the following week. I read the notification twice at my desk and then filed it in the folder where those things go, and called my mother on Sunday. She already knew somehow. Linda always knows, even when she does not ask directly. She said, "Good." Then she asked if I wanted to come for dinner the following weekend. I said yes. She made the pasta dish my father used to request on birthdays, which she had not made in 20 years, and which tasted exactly as I remembered it. Monday, April 6, 2026. No ceremony, no award, no marble lobby. Just the Pentagon on a regular morning, which is to say, alive with the kind of work that almost no one outside the building knows is happening. I arrived at 07:15, nodded to the duty officer. Past 3 lieutenants already deep in a briefing cycle at the long table. Near my office door, standing with a manila folder and the expression of someone who has been waiting a few minutes and is trying to look like he just arrived, was Ensign Tyler Park. 22 years old, 4 months into his assignment with the NICG, sharp in the particular way that very capable people are before they understand what capable means in practice, before someone shows them the harder problems. I had tried to show him those problems in the time we'd had. I had made time for his good questions, pushed back on the hedged conclusions, told him clearly when his work was excellent, and equally clearly when it fell short. I knew that expression. I had worn it once, outside a different office in this building, with a different folder, trying to decide whether to knock. The thing that made me knock was a commander who had told me I was wasting myself, and meant it without flattery. "Park," I said. "Come in." He had been accepted to the NSA Advanced Analyst Program, the most competitive intelligence track in the Navy, the program I had completed at 28, the one that had opened every door that followed. He told me he had applied because 6 weeks ago, reviewing a signals brief at the end of a long day, I had said in passing, "You think like someone who belongs in that program, so apply." He had not told me he was applying. He had just applied. I wanted to say, "Thank you, ma'am. You told me to, and I believed you, because you weren't trying to make me feel good about myself." I thought about that for a moment after he left. I hadn't been conscious of it as a thing that required acknowledgement. I had looked at his analysis and recognized what was in it and said so directly. That was all I had done. But I know how that works on the receiving end, how a single honest sentence from someone who has nothing to gain from flattering you can carry farther than years of qualified, careful encouragement. Rosa Delgado said 3 sentences to me in the fall of 2009, and I am still following them into rooms I did not know existed then. Good, I told him. Don't waste the seat. I had been in rooms that week where the stakes were high and the analysis was difficult, and the commanders making decisions needed a clear picture from my directorate. I had given them that picture. The work had been good, and I knew it, and my team knew it, and the people relying on it would never know it, because that is not how this kind of work functions. That is fine. That is the arrangement I agreed to 22 years ago, when I raised my right hand. The agreement is, you do the work matters, and the record of it lives in rooms that most people will never enter. It does not go on a shelf in an American Legion Hall in Maryland. It goes into the operational record that tells the story of decisions that kept people alive. That is a different kind of shelf. It is a better one. He nodded and left. I watched the door close. At midday, eating at my desk as I usually do, a message arrived on my personal phone. From my mother. Just a photograph with no text beneath it. A framed photograph of my father in his chief petty officer dress uniform. The frame was old, slightly water-stained in one corner, the kind of frame that has lived with a photograph through decades and several moves. It had hung in the hallway of our Norfolk house for as long as I could remember. I had not seen it since before Linda's move to Frank's house, sometime in 2010. A line of text arrived a few seconds later. Found it in a box. I thought you should have it. My father at 29, the same age I was when I was promoted to commander. He is in dress uniform, standing straight, looking directly into the camera with an expression that is serious, but not severe. The expression of a man who takes his work seriously, without needing anyone else to confirm that he should. He never made officer. He served in the enlisted world, the world of senior chiefs, who run ships from the inside out and make operational reality possible, while the commission layer makes the decisions. He was good at it. He would have understood mine completely. I sat with that photograph for a long time, long enough that one of my lieutenants knocked, took one look through the door, and pulled it gently shut without a word. At 5:40, I locked my office and wrote down. In the main corridor near the E-ring, there's a wall of photographs, admirals, joint chiefs, undersecretaries, secretaries of defense across decades. I have passed it hundreds of times. That evening I stopped. I am 43 years old. I am a rear admiral in the United States Navy. I direct a classified intelligence organization that touches active operations in 4 theaters simultaneously. There are decisions being made tonight by commanders relying on analysis produced by my team, and those decisions will keep people alive, and those people will not know my name, and I will not know theirs, and that is how it is supposed to work. I am exactly what I was going to be. I have been exactly this since I was 6 years old at a Norfolk dock. Frank Weston told me once that the Navy doesn't produce real soldiers. He was right. We produce something else entirely. I spent 20 years learning what that was, not to prove it to him, but to deserve it for myself. There is a real difference between those two things. It took me a long time to understand it. I understand it now. I walked out into early April air. The city spread out in the last of the afternoon light. I reached into my pocket and found my keychain and my father's chief petty officer insignia, the eagle and the chevrons, slightly tarnished where it has been since May of 2004. I rubbed it once, then I put my keys in my other hand and walked to the parking structure. Something shifted in me during those March Sunday calls that I do not have a clean word for. It was not forgiveness exactly, not the dramatic version. It was more like a reduction. The thing that had been taking up space for 12 years got smaller. Not because the grievance disappeared, but because I stopped feeding it with my attention. My mother's voice on Sunday mornings, asking careful questions and meaning them, occupied the space that the grievance had been using. It was a better use of the space. When Ensign Park left my office that Monday morning, I sat for a while in the quiet. I thought about the chain of it. Rosa Delgado telling me I was underplaced, me telling Park he belonged in harder problems. Whoever Park would someday say something true and direct to in a hallway somewhere. I thought about a girl sitting on a study floor in Norfolk with a manila folder she was not supposed to find, reading her father's fitness reports and folding the best one into her pocket. I thought about what she was already building, at 9 years old, from the evidence of who he had been. I thought about the keychain in my pocket. The eagle and the chevrons, the weight of something small that has been carried for a long time. If you have been told for years that what you are building doesn't count, I want you to know, the building did not stop. The work did not stop. And eventually, whether anyone ever says so directly or not, it speaks for itself. That is the only ending this kind of story has. and it is enough. It has always been enough. You just have to stay in it long enough to find out. I've thought about that night in the lobby a lot since January. Not with anger. I moved past anger a while ago. What I keep thinking about is the 45 seconds between when he grabbed my arm and when the radio crackled. 45 seconds of standing there, in uniform, in full view of my mother and stepfather, not pulling away. Just waiting. I have spent 22 years in rooms that required me to wait without flinching, and I didn't know that the hardest one was going to be a hotel lobby in D.C. with my mother watching from the bar. What I know now is that the building was never about Frank's approval. It was never about anyone's approval. It was about the work, about the people who needed the right picture at the right time, and the team that gave it to them, and the operations that went right because of what we produced. That is what it was always for. If someone in your life has spent years telling you that what you're building doesn't count, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell me your story. And if this one meant something to you, please subscribe and hit the bell. I have more of these coming, and if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it.